that we would find in the tabernacle, the temporary worship space for God's people. This reading comes from Numbers chapter 4, verse 7. Over the table of the presence, they are to spread a blue cloth and put on it the plates, dishes, and bowls, and the jars for drink offerings. The bread that is continually there is to remain on it. And then our New Testament reading this morning, the first one comes from the Gospel according to Luke in chapter 10, as we sit at table with Mary and Martha in the town of Bethany. We hear this reading from chapter 10, beginning at verse 38 through verse 42. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, what is best, and it will not be taken away from her." And then we move over to chapter 19 of Luke's Gospel, and we hear the first 10 verses as we meet up with Zacchaeus, the tax collector. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be a guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." This is God's wisdom and holy reading for us today. This morning I offer up a Lenten practice for us all. It is a listening exercise. It is a reflection for us all. So I invite you to be comfortable and to hear this story, but place yourself in it. Experience this telling of all are welcome. It's Sunday morning, and the worship service has just finished. Many of the congregation have gone downstairs for fellowship. There are some folk milling around, some standing in twos, others sitting together around the tables in groups of 4. The ladies serving are busy dashing here and there, putting food and drinks out for all to share. There's a good deal of noise because everybody's catching up and chatting. I invite you to picture this. Try to imagine yourselves in our fellowship hall space. You are there. What's the name of the person who is talking to you now? Maybe it is somebody you've known for a long time. Maybe you are part of one of these groups of old friends who always sit together at the same table. The conversation is about the upcoming gathering to raise funds, due to be held at the end of next month. It's always a nice event and raises money for special projects or missions. The person you are with is telling you they've been working on the planning. This year should be our best yet. I think we will raise the needed funds. But as you agree, you happen to glance over their shoulder and notice there's a woman standing on her own, holding a cup of tea and eating some of the goodies put out. You don't know who she is. You've never noticed her in the congregation before. She's obviously a newcomer. Because nobody is talking to her, she's pretending to be intensely interested in the papers posted up on the wall. You look around in the fellowship hall a bit further, and surprisingly, you see someone else you've never seen in the church before. He, too, is standing on his own, and nobody is talking to him either. He's a young guy, early 30s maybe. He's had all the hair shaved off his head, and he's wearing a green sweatshirt with the word "Now" printed on the front. Your eyes meet, and he's mouthing something to you across the room. He's trying to tell you something, and from the look on his face, it seems to be very urgent. But of course, because of the noise, you can't make out what he's saying. So he smiles and nods his head towards the woman who's reading the stuff on the wall. And then he points to his chest, to the single word printed on his green sweatshirt. And suddenly it dawns on you. He nods towards her again, and his lips move again, repeating the same sentence as before. And then he points to the printing on his sweatshirt again. What are the words he keeps on repeating? What is he trying to tell you? What is he asking you to do? Whatever your experience, whatever your reflection, let it sit with you this day. Oh God, hear this prayer. Thanks be to Jesus, whose concern is that all are made welcome and accepted. Thanks be to Jesus, who has shown us how to do it in the simplest and most practical of ways. Amen. This morning, we explore two table stories, both from the Gospel according to Luke, and probably occurring about a year apart, with the story of Jesus raising Mary and Martha's brother Lazarus from the dead in between, and just months before Zacchaeus' dinner with Jesus. There is also another story of Mary and Martha, might be churning in your mind as well, and it comes from John's Gospel, and it is in the last days before Jesus' death, where Mary will show her sacrificial love by anointing Jesus with the expensive perfume, spikenard, Another anointing story, but different from last week's. Our first table story takes place in Bethany, about 2 miles from Jerusalem at the home of Martha. This is one of at least 3 visits by Jesus recorded in the Gospels to this home in Bethany, where he dropped by to visit his good friends, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. What do we know about these 2 sisters, friends of Jesus and siblings of Lazarus? We know that they lived together in a home in Bethany, a quiet little village southwest of the Mount of Olives, along the Jericho Road. It was only a short walk over the Mount of Olives and then to the temple in Jerusalem. It is believed that Martha is the older of the sisters, possibly a widow, since it appears that she is head of the household that Jesus visits. It is also believed that Mary, the younger sister, is unmarried or a widow and lives with her older sister in the same household. We understand that they, along with their brother Lazarus, are all 3 friends of Jesus. This morning, we find ourselves in Martha's home as she is busy preparing the meal, getting everything ready for dinner with Jesus, and probably at least some, if not all 12, of the disciples. Here we discover the truth that no 2 siblings are alike, or that these 2 sisters in particular are as different as night and day. Martha, it seems, is very attentive, practical, eager-hearted, and a gracious hostess, which in Bible times was the expectation of a woman to do everything in her power to provide welcoming hospitality, from cool water in which to wash one's feet to a feast including freshly made bread and wine for all the guests. Martha appears to have been the perfect hostess, extending hospitality to all of her guests, especially when they were friends or loved ones. Mary was the more pensive and quieter of the 2, perhaps more impassioned and imaginative. Often, this story carries the controversy over Mary and Martha, and taking sides as to which one is more admirable, the practical one or the spiritual one. But today, we are going to look at this with a new twist. And we are going to focus on Mary and Martha, beloved friends of Jesus, and the setting in which the meal is being prepared, and the table talk that happens there. At this table, unlike the tables of the past 2 weeks, the meal is being prepared before it is then served, and the hostess interacts with the guests. In a way, this story takes us to the kitchen table, where the preparations for the meal are being made. The kitchen table where we would prepare the meal for Jesus. Unless one employs a cook or hires a caterer to be good hosts, someone is in the kitchen preparing while someone else is making conversation with the guests. Both actions are gracious hospitality and necessary for making people feel welcome. In biblical times, there were not kitchens like we think of today, but the largest main and generally central room of the house, the living room, was typically also the place where food was prepared. Places to eat the meal, dining areas, were typically a central courtyard area, sometimes indoors or on porches attached to the exterior of the house. Sometimes the food was prepared in the same space. It was served and consumed. Archaeologists have found evidence of the ancient clay ovens for baking bread, the flat stone tablets or tables probably used for food preparation, the grinding stones for grains, the fire pits, the hearths, and cisterns, as well as the ceramic cooking pots, jars, and bowls. Food preparation time was lengthy. No microwave to pop things in, and the main meal of the day was in the evening at sundown, typically with a common stew which had been cooked over the fire with bread baked in the clay oven. This was the only hot meal prepared, with simply a morning morsel to break the fast in the morning and a meal at noonish, which usually was just some bread dipped in olive oil with vegetables or fruits during the rest from one's labor. Supper was the meal the whole family sat down and to eat together at a leisurely pace, and sometimes even linger. For Martha to be in the same space as her sister listening to the teachings of Jesus could have been very possible. But Martha was focused on preparing the meal for her brought-in guests. One of the special things about this story is how ordinary it is. Jesus doesn't just have disciples. He has friends. Friends who are close enough that he can just drop by. When he arrives, he knows he will receive both kinds of gracious hospitality: food and friendship, nourishment and conversation. All are essential to health and wholeness. The practice of Sabbath among the Jewish people captures this dual nature of graciousness perfectly. Shabbat, or Sabbath, begins at sundown on Friday. The goal is to have the meal entirely prepared and cooked in advance so the Sabbath rest, where there is no labor, can be practiced. This also allows the one who has prepared the meal to be fully present to the guests. It is a special blessing to invite friends to share this time. It is a time of blessing and sharing in addition to eating. The point is to linger at the table, to enjoy the food and conversation throughout the evening, to rest together, and to be nourished by both food and friendship. We can picture this kind of gracious hospitality as Martha prepares the meal and Mary sits and listens to Jesus until it is time to serve the evening meal on the table. Our focus is on a different table than the past couple weeks, the table where the meal is prepared, the kitchen table. Even today, preparing a meal for guests takes some time. Sometimes the chef is the only one in the kitchen. Other times there are several people cooking and preparing in the same space. That is where conversation, table talk, can happen. Whether it is swapping tips or recipes, or just chatting about the day, there is someone to talk to as you labor over a hot stove or chop food up on the cutting board. Today, many of us can put the finishing touches on a meal while working and talking together in the kitchen with our guests. Maybe they are at the counter enjoying a glass of wine or even helping with the final preparations. Sometimes our kitchens are even open to the dining area or the entire living area without the barrier of walls to keep us hidden away in the kitchen cooking. I believe that the conversation is different in the kitchen than the entire living area, the dining room, or the living room. Chatting is more casual, freer, more comfortable. Conversation changes at the kitchen table, even if you were eating there. Think about it. Pretty much anything can be discussed at the kitchen table. Even religion, money, and politics. But the conversation shifts when you are in the dining room table, or when the table is set for guests with the fancy china. The kitchen is the place to share your day, your ups and downs, anything that is on your heart. How many of us sat at the kitchen counter or the table after school growing up, sharing everything that happened that day with our mom while she prepared the evening meal? How many family meetings or planning took place at the kitchen table? It is a casual, comfortable atmosphere to be yourself and share your story. And the conversation while a meal is being prepared, those can become intimate conversations between family members, confidential sharing between sisters, a mother and daughter, laughter and tears, the sharing of personal stories, all in the kitchen. Preparation of the meal is important. If no one does the cooking, then no one eats. Especially at this table in Bethany, where takeout or drive-through is not an option. Martha, in the midst of her preparation, comes to Jesus to share her frustrations that Mary is not helping out at all with the meal preparation. Martha seems like the type of hostess who spares no efforts to provide a grand meal, and it is her house. But apparently she forgot that the other part of gracious hospitality is to pay attention to your guest. To demonstrate just how good of friends they are, Martha pulls Jesus into an unpleasant family conflict. Jesus doesn't criticize her for preparing the meal, which he soon will enjoy, but for overlooking that Mary is called to a different kind of service. Mary is a reminder to us that we need time for the better part. Simply sitting at the feet of Jesus or at the kitchen table. The better part is available to each of us, Mary or Martha, you or me. The better part is Jesus' acceptance and love for us all, just the way we are. Martha doesn't resent Jesus' words, doesn't say, "The heck with you, I still think Mary should be helping me." Instead, she hears and sees what Jesus is showing her. She learns from his teaching. Martha grasps that what Jesus wants is her presence, the gift of availability. Jesus doesn't just want her gift of preparing the meal and sitting at the table, but she is invited to come even closer. Jesus invites her to show up before God with a heart open and ready to receive. It is at the feet of Jesus that we too are invited. It's that place where we are comfortable, where we kick off our shoes, let our hair down, and gather at the kitchen table. A place of transparency and vulnerability, a place of safety and personal conversations, a place we are completely known and loved unconditionally. Martha is no longer frantic and resentful, but full of faith and trust. The kind of faith and trust that comes from spending more time with Jesus. We too need to find time to be with Jesus, to slow down and seek God's presence, to find time to listen, to nurture our relationship with God, and strengthen our faith and trust. Our second table story takes place in Jericho as Jesus was passing through on his way to Jerusalem. Jericho was about 15 miles northeast of Jerusalem, so a distance from Bethany where we sat at table with Mary and Martha. It is here that Jesus is doing some teaching. We are not sure where, only that there are some trees nearby and a crowd has gathered. As Jesus teaches, a man of short stature apparently wishes to see and hear this teacher, so he climbs up a sycamore tree for a better look. We meet Zacchaeus, who is a chief tax collector. So he, like Matthew, who we met a couple weeks ago, collected the taxes for the Romans, the duty on import-exports, foods for domestic trade, and virtually everything that moved by road. But Zacchaeus would have stayed behind the scenes and hired others, like Matthew, to collect taxes for him. He was probably in charge of a district with many tax collectors under him, and the region was prosperous at the time, so Zacchaeus had grown rich while at the same time being hated by most and considered a deceitful sinner, like all those tax collectors that worked for him. Zacchaeus is invited to host Jesus at his table from the heights of the sycamore tree. Whether he was in the tree to be inconspicuous or because he was too short to see over the crowds, Jesus spotted him and called him down and invited himself to supper. This time, Jesus invites himself to dinner, and Zacchaeus becomes a spontaneous host, like Martha hosting an unexpected guest. Obviously, he wanted to see Jesus, but when Jesus sees him in the tree, he announces that he and his friends are ready to accept Zacchaeus' gracious hospitality. Somewhere between that tree encounter and the end of the meal, Zacchaeus' life is transformed by sharing a table with Jesus. Has an invitation ever changed your life? We don't know what the conversation was about. Maybe the same as when Jesus sat at Matthew's table with his friends, other tax collectors. But we do know that Zacchaeus' heart changed. Jesus' words and stories, actions, and mission transformed this wee little man. Zacchaeus stands up and in his public announcement, he promises what the rich ruler in the parable was unable to do. He vows to give half his possessions to the poor. And if he has cheated anybody out of anything, of course he has. He's a tax collector. He will pay back 4 times the amount, the full repayment required under the law in case of theft. Eating with Jesus can be dangerous. It can change your life. Jesus also promised Zacchaeus, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is the son of Abraham. In other words, Zacchaeus is a true Jew, not only an ancestor of Abraham, but one who also walks in the footsteps of Abraham's faith. Jesus recognizes the tax collector as a son of Abraham, even though Jewish society excluded him. This table story ends with these words: "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." Jesus' mission statement. This is an important summary of Jesus' purpose on earth, to bring salvation, God's mercy and forgiveness, and to share God's amazing grace. From Galilee down to Bethany and along the Jericho road to the old city and back to Jerusalem, Jesus' message is clear. All are welcome at the table. And there is nothing we need to do to be invited. Matter of fact, Jesus may just drop by or even invite himself to the table. God chooses us and doesn't wait for an invitation. The table of grace is just like the kitchen table, where a comfortable, personal, genuine conversation can happen between anyone and everyone, just like table talk between family and friends. Come to the table of grace.